Okay, briefly summarizing what I just said about Levinas in response to Pane. Right, we're dealing with the first text by Levinas. So unlike Kant, and this is good for those of you who didn't catch what I said, unlike Kant, right, where the ethics is autonomous, for Levinas, the ethics is heteronymous. In other words, for Kant, you know what to do, you should know what to do without any consideration of the outside world. Whereas for Levinas, it's the outside world, the need of the other, the plea of the other that awakens you to what you should do. Right? And this is something which occurs on the level of the body, on the level of the senses. You feel moved in your body, right? By the way, in the Hebrew, remember Levinas is Jewish, you have the concept of compassion, right? Which in Hebrew is rachamim, is similar to Arabic for those of you who know. And then you have the word rechem, which is the same word, which means womb. Entrails, gut, right? So in the Hebrew idea of compassion, it's actually you're moved in your gut, right? That's what compassion means for the Hebrew. It's a physical reaction, right? You're moved in your womb or in your gut or in your entrails, right? To use biblical language, right? So compassion is not something you feel in your heart or in your mind, right? This is something that you feel in your body, right? And that's where Levinas is coming from, right? Ethics is felt on the body. And of course, Kant would never agree with that, right? Kant is like, no, that's instinct. There should be no sense of compassion or feelings. It should all be rational. To respond to Coco, right? Except that conscience, right, the voice of conscience for Kant is more of an intellectual voice, right? You sense and you hear a voice. This is like Kant. For Levinas, you feel a wound, you feel a pain for the other. So it's a little different from the voice of conscience, which is just a little message coming in your mind, right? This is like, right? You're hit, you're hurt, you're wounded for the other, you're feeling for them. So it's a little more powerful, more embodied. Does that make sense, Coco? Coco, you there?
Relatively, yes.
Okay. All right. Good. Okay, so let's get into the text for today's very difficult text. First of all, let me get an idea. Let me see how much time I have to get an idea. I don't have much time, so I'm not even going to ask you how you experienced Levinas. I know it was horrifying and terrifying. Let's just get into the text right away because we have only like 40 minutes left, and I want to be able to. It's a difficult text, so. Okay, so before we get in the text, I want to review a little bit the concepts of Husserl because they're very useful to understand what is going on in this text, right? So remember that for Husserl, consciousness, this is his key phrase, right, is intentional. In other words, the self is always moving outside of itself for Husserl, right? In other words, and it's true, if you think about it, you're always seeing something, hearing something, feeling something, thinking something about the world, right? We are constantly in contact, right, with the external world. That's what Husserl means by consciousness always being intentional. And of course, you know that Levinas likes this idea, right? This idea of a subject which is inherently relational. Right? This is where Levinas is trying to move Western thought, right? To a concept of the subject of the self as essentially relational, right? Which it hasn't been so far. So he's loving what Husserl is doing there. So in addition to this, we have two movements in the movement of connecting to the world, right? There are two moments to that movement. Anybody remember what they are in the Greek? Yes? What's the two Greek words I taught you last time? See if you remember.
Nomis and noma. Gnosis and noma.
Almost. It's in the text, you're right, but it's the hiletic and the noetic. And noesis and noema, right, is part of this noetic movement, right? Noesis is the movement of knowing, and noema is what is known, right? But the two main movements of intentionality is first being hit by the impressions. This is the hiletic moment. And second, making sense of those impressions, this is the noetic moment, right? Everything clear so far? This is the basis. Is everything clear so far? Put your hand in the screen. Okay, now, few more words. The noetic, let's elaborate a little bit on the noetic moment because some of you asked this question. This movement of the noetic, where you're giving meaning, this movement he calls the movement of signification or sense, right? So you've seen these words. A lot of you were asking, what is signification? What is sense, right? Signification is the act of giving meaning, right? So this is still in the Husserl, right? Husserl is saying signification, the moment of signification is the moment where you give meaning, where you give signification, where you give sense, right? To what you are feeling or seeing or hearing, right? Now, what Levinas is going to do with that word is play with it. And this is where you have to be not even subtle. You have to be playful. He's going to do a play on words. So do you want me to share this or is it getting too deep? Put your hand on the screen if you want me to talk about Levinas's play on words with signification, because it's now going into the language. So Levinas is looking at that word and he's like, this is an interesting word, signification, because he's thinking the words to signify, right, means when we're talking about a sign, right, to signify is to say that this points to this, right? This is also the work of signification. When you're signifying something, you're saying what I mean is, so there's this and what I mean. So to signify is basically to use a sign, right? He's now entering the philosophy of language or a word, right? And a word always points to something else, right? He's studying signification. What does it mean to signify? It means you have a word, which is, or meaning, which is pointing to something else, right? And so he says, well, so to signify I'm trying to write it. To signify means that there is something stands for something. You have one thing stands for the other, right? This is the essence of language, right? You have a sign. You have, for example, the word pen. The word pen signifies this, right? Points to this. So the word is something which stands for something else. He's in the philosophy of language right there. Are we clear with what he means by the signify means the word is standing for the object, something standing for something else? Are we good? Now watch this. So he's saying, okay, so to signify is one for the other. Are you seeing where he's going? To signify is to be for the other. To signify is ethics. All right, did you follow what he did? You don't have to go that deep, but that's the idea. He's saying signification is simply, in Husserl, it's the act of giving meaning, but it's also the act of moving outside of myself towards something else, right? That's the essence of language. I say something which points to something else. I am for the other. Okay, if you didn't get it, it's okay. He's just playing with the words. He does that a lot, right? But all you need to remember right now is this notion of signification simply means to give meaning to the impression that hits you. So far, so good? Hand? Okay, now we're ready to go into what Levinas is doing, right? And what he's going to do is actually use the same language. He's going to be following this idea of intentionality, of being hit and responding to describe the moment of the ethical encounter with the other. Okay, let me say that again. So Levinas is going to use this language and this paradigm that we just described to describe the encounter with another human being. So he's broadening what Husserl is doing beyond just the realm of objects. He's broadening it now to the encounter with a human being. Okay, so that's what he's doing. So Husserl is only interested in describing objects, right? The sunlight hits me, I feel the warmth and the light, I open my eyes and I make sense of it. Hiletic, noetic. Husserl is doing mostly, right? He's talking about our relationship with the world. Levinas is now focusing on our relationship with the human other. He's going to use the Husserlian language, but he's going to stretch it. He's going to remanipulate it. And so we'll see how he does that. So today we're going to describe the structure of the encounter with another human being using this hiletic noetic moment. So we will have a hiletic moment, which my computer keeps on correcting, and we will have a noetic moment. Okay, so let's start with the hiletic. So there's several expressions that point to this kind of being hit by the other, right? And of course, it's much more than being hit by, you know, what they look like and so forth. You're going to see it goes much deeper. So I'm going to kind of go around. I'm going to be focusing on the section 7, Sense and Ethics. So that's where I'll be focusing, which is page 29. Right, this is where I'll be most there and a little further, right? So I'm starting there. Okay, so he begins by saying, first element of the hiletic moment, he calls, I'm gonna just write the outline, okay? Hiletic moment has two moments. You have A, the piercing of the other, and B, no, I didn't mean to say that, not piercing. Sorry, I can't erase it. Okay, changing A. A, we have the nudity of the other. Nakedness, I think, is rather what is used. Nakedness of the other. And B, we have the visitation of the other. Okay, this is the two moments of the hiletic. Take out the first A, which says piercing of the other. And then we have the noetic, which we'll talk about. Okay, so let's look a little. So what I'm going to do right now is summarize. I'm going to summarize what he's saying, and then we'll look at the quotes. Otherwise, we'll never find our way. Basically, what Levinas is saying at the moment of the hiletic, right, is that the other hits me to a certain degree that, in a way, I'm not able to make sense of him. So this is further than Husserl, right? Husserl, I'm always able to make sense. Here, the other hits me in a way that he is, Levinas says, naked. In other words, he has no form, okay? So he hits me without a form. Levinas talks about the nakedness of the face. That means simply there is no visible garment. There is nothing that you can see, right? That's what he means by the nakedness, no form. If there is no form, I can't see what it is, right? So that's the first way that the other hits me in a way that I can't figure out who he is entirely. Okay, that's the first way. And this should remind you of Buber. What does Buber say about that? Something very similar. The other hits me in a way that is too much. I can't make sense. Where did Buber say something similar?
The U has no borders, something like that.
Yeah, the U has no borders. In other words, exactly the same idea. No definition. I can't figure him out, right? So this is very, very similar, right? So that's the first moment where Levinas is talking like Buber, right? But there's a second moment, and this is where it gets very, very Levinasian and also very disturbing, right? For a Western mindset. The second way, the deeper way that the other hits me, is that they intrude on my world, they disturb my world, and they affect me in my body in a way that I can never go back to who I was before. Okay, let me say that again. So the other hits me also in a way that disturbs my world, jolts my world, affects me, and now everything is ruined. I can't forget what I just saw. Okay, I'll give you an example. Suppose you're walking down the street. This happened to me a lot. You're in a good mood for once, right? And you're like, oh, I'm going to go to Manhattan, you know, I'm going to go to my favorite places, whatever, I'm going to be having fun. And you're like in the street and the weather is nice and there's not too much traffic and you're so happy. And then all of a sudden you stumble on one of these homeless people. And this one looks particularly miserable, right? And is asking you for money. At that moment, whether you like it or not, your day has been partially ruined, correct? Everyone leaves with like, ah, man, right? Who follows what I'm saying? That part of you is like, ah, damn, right? And you're like, and now you're struggling. Should I help them? Should I not help them? Then your mind kicks in like, yeah, if I help them, they're going to use it for drugs. I should. And you're having this big debate. But the moment of being hit, this is something that happens to you whether you like it or not. You have now been disturbed by the other, right? So the other whether it's someone in the street, or it can be, of course, your romantic partner, right? They will constantly enter in your world and disturb, right? You're trying to, you're trying to like do some work, and your kid will come running in and be like, and now you're like, or, someone in your family get sick, and now you're like, a lot of you dealing with this, right? And now you don't have time for your own stuff, you got to be over there. Do you see what I'm saying? How the other constantly disturbing our world, right? And affects us, right? Halmurad, go ahead.
So does it have to be predominantly negative experience of that disturbance, or could it be positive as well?
Good point. It's a really good point. Oh, wow. Yeah, when Levinas is talking about the other as other, because of course the other is not just different. Some of you mentioned that in the reading assignment. The other is also similar, right? But when the other is similar, they are simply, they're like me at that moment, and they're not others. So I think that for Levinas, to be other means a certain disruption, right? Why? Because disruption really moves you out of yourself. If it's pleasant, it stays, right? The other becomes kind of like an object of what Levinas calls enjoyment, right? And at that moment, you are in this dynamic of, I am taking for myself, taking for, so for Levinas, pleasure with another, right, is part of their otherness, but their deepest otherness, right, where they are really moving you out of yourself. Pleasure doesn't move you completely out of yourself, because you have pleasure, but it comes back, right? You feel comforted by the pleasure, comes back to you. This kind of other through pain, right? This really makes you uncomfortable, and you are brought out of yourself. You are not comfortable anymore. So the other has, a human being can be both pleasurable, but at that moment, he's not yet truly an other. The sign that he's truly manifesting himself or herself as another is the disruption, which is why I tell my students in my love class, that first fight that you have, as a couple, this is actually very healthy, because at that moment, the other is finally becoming another, not just your buddy or your best friend, or, or the one that is there for you. It's a good moment of, now you're not just for me. You are a you, not just an it, right? Makes sense, Halmurad? I made a long speech. I think I lost you. Are you?
Yeah, definitely makes sense. So there has to be that kick, that conflict, that, that shaking.
Because then it's just an it. Very often when we are just in a relationship of pleasure, the other quickly boils down to an it, right? The you, remember Buber says that too, the you confronts me, right? The moment that you have a you, it's never, like pleasurable moment. No, right? I think there was another hand, or was I dreaming it? I was dreaming it. Okay, good. So that's okay. So that's what we're talking about, right? The other is going to.
I'm actually sorry. I was trying to raise my hand, and this entire UI is horrible.
Okay, Coco, go ahead.
I feel like.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead. It was Allegre. Go ahead, Coco.
Oh, gotcha. So my only problem with this is that I don't see why the other has to be an inherently negative thing. Like, I understand the idea of if it's pleasurable, then, but there's an in-between between pleasure and pain. There's neither. When that comes from, say, an understanding of the situation. Let's use the homeless person as an example. I don't view my day as ruined if I'm in a good mood, which, well, okay, that's a big if, but still. But no, I don't see why as a day ruined or even as a moment ruined. I'm like, yeah, that happens. It's a horrible aspect of our society, and that reflection of, I intellectualize in my head, and I'm like, but I don't view it as it ruins it. I live with it. I see it as it is. It's horrid, and I don't feel like it's inherently hurts or displeasures me. It just, maybe it's because I got numb to it. Maybe I've gotten numb to it. Not to say that I don't feel bad on any level. I do, but it doesn't feel like, it doesn't ruin it for me. it just turns my intellectual brain on and brings out the anarchist in me.
Let me tell you why it doesn't ruin your day.
Sure.
And this is something that happens to a lot of us. Most of us are not ruined, right, by that experience. We see it, we feel slightly uncomfortable, we move on. Why? Immediately the mind kicks in and justifies and finds a way to absolve us from the responsibility, right? Like you said so well, society is really messed up, right? It's society's fault.
I mean, it is.
It
I mean,
is.
it kind of is.
But do you see how you're deviating, right? The other is calling on you, and you deviate the responsibility.
I mean, it's not like I've never given money before. It's just more of a, I mean, if I have it, but which is a pretty big if also as well. But because I'm broke. But I don't know. It just feels like I don't feel it as a ruin thing, even if whether I give it or not, because sometimes I don't have a lot of money, sometimes I do, and I'm like, okay, if I'm feeling bad money, I give. But it depends. I don't. That conversation of, oh, what do they use it for drugs? I don't care about if they use it for drugs. You know what? If you're in that bit of a situation, moving on. Sorry, past that. Very much past that. I don't view it as a ruined day, not because I disregard them as another human being. Because I like to think, no, I view them completely as one, because I'm like, oh, yeah, wow, the world fucked you over. And, it's more of a, like, there's a lot of circumstances that probably led it to this point. And a lot of it probably wasn't all on you, buddy. And it's horrible and it sucks. And you know what? Another thing that comes to mind is, oh, that could be me. That could have been me given slightly different circumstances. Okay,
so good. Yeah, you're illustrating very well the mechanism, right? When we are hit by something like that, right?
But at the same time, I don't feel like it ruins it. I don't know. Maybe it's a
Absolutely. It doesn't ruin it necessarily, right? But it does affect you to a certain degree. You notice, right?
Yeah, I notice. Yeah.
And the fact that your mind kicks in shows that there is something that you're trying to process, right? And that's what Levinas is saying. The problem with most of us, right, is that instead of receiving the kick, like was it Hammurad was saying, we immediately fall into process mode, right? So you illustrated it very well, what most of us are doing, right? And then you find a way to deviate, right? Which we'll talk about that, right, in a second. Allegre, what do you want to add?
I was just thinking like an analogy, like if we're like bodies of water and the other is like a drop of water, that drop of water ripples along the water, and that does like it disrupts, but it leaves an impression, like in the books, it leaves a trace of what happens, even then if we pass it and we have not gone by it. But I'm just thinking like when we see too many of these drops, like we may develop some apathy, and that might be this criticism, like he might bring up in the book. It's because when we see too much of these problems, we might bring some like apathy to the other, and that's also the problem why we just don't feel these things anymore. Like usually when we see homeless, we're meant to feel this comfort. We're meant to feel like we should help them. But when we see too many of them, we just don't feel anything anymore.
It's an over phenomenon.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's excessive. Very good. Yeah, so you guys are seeing, right? There are many ways that we try to deal with this kick, right? And we have to, because it especially in New York City, right? It's overwhelming. It's everywhere, right? So, but what we can agree on, I think, at this point is that there is a kick, right? So that's the moment what Levinas calls the hiletic moment. That's the point, right? You're being hit. You see how Levinas is transposing, right? Husserl was only talking about being hit by impressions, right? The sunlight, the warmth. Levinas is now going deeper. He's saying, yeah, we're actually, when we're meeting a human other, it's not just that we're being hit by, superficial impressions about their body and their blood temperature. And so we are hit by their neediness, right? That's the hiletic moment. Everybody clear on this first moment, the hiletic? Put your hand in the screen. Okay, so now we can move into, we'll go into the quotes afterwards. So briefly now we can move into the noetic moment, right? And actually, no, let's go into a few quotes. Now I'm hesitating, so always a race for time. Let me make sure everyone's muted. This is interfering with my brain waves. Okay, good. Very good. Okay, so let me finish. Let's do the noetic. Let me summarize that, and then we'll do everything again with the quotes. So the noetic moment is the moment for Husserl of the response, right? You give meaning to what is happening. Now, if you're hit by someone's need, you also are called to respond, right? But of course, this is not an intellectual response like, oh, a hungry person, right? No, the only way to respond to the other as other is to respond with your body. You're hit in your body and you respond in your body. What would that look like to respond with your body to the other person's need? Who cut what needs to be done at that moment? What your, well, not needs to be done, but what is the other asking? Who can tell me? What does the response look like for Levinas? Very good, Cosmidis, right? You respond physically to the other's physical need. Everything is taking place in Levinas on the level of the body, the sensible world, right? And so this is how we respond. Now, here's the interesting part, right, for Levinas. We are not free to be moved by the other. This is where Levinas disagrees with Kant. We are not free to decide. I mean, we're free to decide, but we're not free to be affected or not. Whether we like it or not, we are, as Levinas says, responsible, or responsible. It's playing again, right? We are always, whether we like it or not, responsible. When you meet a homeless person who's asking for money, you have something to give him, right? We always have some resource. It doesn't even have to be money. It can be a smile. It can be a conversation. It can be a Metro card, but we always are able to respond. As this is what Levinas means when he says we are responsible whether we like it or not. And this is where many people hate him, right? Because like, I'm not responsible for this. I didn't do this. I didn't give birth to this man, right? I didn't create the society we're in. I'm helpless. Levinas is saying we're never helpless. We are always capable to respond to a certain degree. You don't even if you're dirt poor, like Coco was saying, right? You can still respond to the need by either looking their way. Even a look is enough, right? Levinas knows about that. Sometimes just a look, a smile, a conversation, you know, or giving something that you have in your purse, right? This is what it means to truly live on the mode of encounter, right? And so that's where a lot of us will lose Levinas, right? We say, well, you are responsible for that person, or you are responsible to their need, whether you choose to or not. Now, that's still the Heletic moment. The Noetic moment is the moment of free will. At that moment, you have to decide, will I respond or not? So we're free to respond or not, but we are not free to be responsible or not. Are you following me on this nuance so far? Everybody put your hand. Okay. So that's the idea, right? That we are free to respond or not. And most of us, right, choose not to respond. And because we feel somehow disturbed still, we make up, right? The mind kicks in, justifies why we shouldn't respond. And, you know, we have a lot of us who will be saying, I've done it too. Yeah, you know, this is, society sucks, and we walk away. Or we're like, yeah, you know, maybe he should get a damn job, right? Or maybe, you know, I shouldn't help him because X, Y, and Z. So we rationalize our way out of the response, right? Because it is such a weight. The other, according to Levinas, is heavy. The other is always too heavy, right? He talks about, Levinas has a lot of metaphors drawn from pregnancy in his texts, right? He talks a lot about carrying the other, like a mother carries a child. And it's heavy, it's uncomfortable, right? And yet, and this is the conclusion of Levinas in this text, right? To respond is what brings you to your highest self. And we've seen this before with other texts, right? To respond is to really become the self that you, the unique self. He talks about being unique, the unique self or the higher self that you were meant to be, right? Not to respond is to miss the opportunity, right? Not only to connect to the other, but to connect to yourself. Okay, is the summary clear? Now we'll go in the text. Okay, great. All right, let's go and see a little bit how he says all of this. So going back, the Heletic moment, the other first hits me in a way that I cannot make sense. This is Levinas, right? Let's go to page 32. No, 31. Page 31. Where is it? He's oh, I just not quote. Okay. Okay. Good. Let's go to the third paragraph, 31. The top, the other who manifests. Are you there? Put your hand in the screen. Okay. So the other who manifests himself in the face pierces, in a way, his own plastic essence. Okay, plastic essence means simply the visible form. So the face is always more than just nice skin and, you know, hair and color eyes and kind of smile. The face always says a lot more. That's what, this is a metaphor. Oh, shit. Are you there? Are everybody there?
Yeah, what's going on?
Did I disappear?
No.
Oh, good. Okay.
You just suddenly just went shit, and I'm like,
yeah.
what's
I disappeared to myself. Okay, I'm back. I'm back, guys. Okay. Where was I? I was in a big tirade. Yeah. Okay. So the face, right, actually always, so the face is a metaphor to express what it means to encounter the other. Just like a human face, right, gives you so much more information than just a pretty face, right? The human being. There is what we would call, what the philosopher Marion calls a saturated phenomenon, meaning it's saturated, it's too much, right? Too much information. So that's what he means here, right? By it pierces the plastic essence, like a being who opens a window where nevertheless his face is already traced, right? There's a lot more going on than meets the eye. That's the idea, right? So very close to Buber here on this first point, right? When you meet the other, it's like a window, right? There's a lot more going on. There's not just this window. When you open it, there's a whole mansion behind it, right? So there's a lot more in the other than meets the eye. That's what Levinas is saying in several of these passages. Also, when he talks about the face being naked, same idea, right? It has no form, right? It's more than its form, right? Or you can say, we are more than our clothes. There's a whole world behind it, right? That's what he's saying again, right? Are we clear on this first point? This is the easy one where he's just like Buber. Now, here's the moment of the hiletic, which is the disturbance, right? Let's go to that part. Page 31. Okay. I'm in the second paragraph, so same page. Yeah, you see in the middle of the second paragraph in italics, making an entry. Can you go there? Put your hand in the screen when you're there. Okay, so he says this, that presence, the presence of the other, consists in coming to us, making an entry. They enter. We didn't invite them. Here they are now inside, right? Which can be stated thus. The phenomenon that is the apparition of the other is also face, etc. A couple lines down, the epiphany of the face is visitation, you know, like an unwanted visitor. How many of you come from cultures where at any time a relative can come up at your door and like they're gonna sit down and take over? Anybody have this? Okay, yes. This is how the other works, right? They're gonna show up anytime. They don't care about your schedule, right? They don't care you have 1,000 things to do. They're gonna sit down in your sofa and your couch. They're gonna ask for coffee. They're gonna wanna tell you their lives, right? This is the visitation, okay, of the other. Visitation, allusion also to the visitation of the angels in the New Testament, where it's always a powerful intrusion, right? It's always so powerful when you have in the Hebrew Bible and in the Gospels, by the way, an angel that visits, you're on the ground trembling, right? You're not yourself anymore, right? You've come undone. This is what he means also by visitation, right? It's a biblical concept. Last word, I think this is good, this is good. Oh, pierces my world, that was nice, page 31. Where is it? Where is this pierces my world? Anybody see it? Supposed to be here. No, okay, never mind. All right, you're getting the idea, right? So that's what he's saying right now. so this intrusion, right, continuing along those lines, is not something we can choose. And that's where Levinas says on page 32, there is no free thinking. I'm going to find it. Page 32, help me. There's no free thinking. Where did I put this? Here it is. Yeah, this is an even better quote. Go to the second paragraph, the last sentence. Consciousness loses its first place. Are you there? Put your hand in the screen. Okay, right. When he says consciousness loses its first place, he's saying you are now, there is an page 32, second paragraph, last line, right? So consciousness loses its first page means that first place, I can't talk. First place, right? Means simply that we are not the origin anymore of what we need to do. We are almost being told what to do here, right? The other is what is in a way commanding us to act a certain way. This is no more Kant, where you had your own reason commanding you to do the right thing based on what you know. Now it's the other from the outside in a way that is commanding you to help, right? In other words, why is it a command? Because we feel moved to respond, right? If it wasn't a command, we wouldn't even notice. So this is so powerful when he uses the word command, right? And this is the next line. Thus, the presence of the face signifies an irrefutable order in the sense of a command, a commandment that arrests the availability of consciousness. Consciousness is challenged by the face, right? So he's using very powerful biblical language here when he uses the command. It's not for nothing. He's saying the other commands me. Why? Because I have no choice in the matter. The other is telling me right now to do something that I did not want to do on my own, and that I feel that it is imperative that I do. But of course, right, I immediately, what's the word? Deviate the responsibility because it's so overwhelming now that I got to help him, therefore them, and then him, and then who, and then I'm penniless, right? So most of us don't have, all of us actually, we don't have what it takes to carry the other. But Levinas is saying we should be aware that even if we cannot respond, we are still responsible, right? Response-able. So the command means that there is an imperative here that I feel that I should respond to, right? Even I don't want to, even I haven't chosen to, the command now is there, whether I like it or not. Good. Any questions so far before we get into the noetic response, or any objections or complaints about what he's saying? All right. Yes, Kang, go ahead.
I mean, this all makes sense, but it just seems to be coming from always the perspective of like the person who has more. So what if you are the other demanding something from somebody else?
The other, you cannot, right, okay, let me explain. So for Levinas, the self is always the one who has more, right? And the other is always the one who has less. So yes, you can find yourself to be the other, but as soon as you meet another other, and again, you don't need to have much, a smile is enough, right? You become the self again, right? So even if we are penniless and suffering and so forth, right? We still can be nudged by the others around us, right? So of course, sometimes I'm the other, but I'm always also a self. Does that make sense, Kang?
Oh, sorry, yeah.
I'll give you an example, right, from the Gospels. You have this very famous story of Jesus, right, who was crucified. He's, of course, in the worst possible place right now, right? He's on this cross, he's about to die, he's bleeding to death, right? He's clearly the other, and yet he's looking in front of him at his mother, right, who is completely undone, right? And he sees next to her his favorite disciple. He's the other. He's, pinned to, he's about to die. He's in the worst possible place in the universe. And yet he turns to his disciple and he says, here is your mother, and mother, here is your son. This is what it means, right? According to Levinas, even if you are in the worst possible situation, and you meet another, you're always you can do something, right? Always there is something that can come out of you, no matter how helpless and distraught you are yourself, right? That would be not a very good Levinasian example, but a good example nevertheless. Okay, so that's the idea, right? So now going into the noetic, the response, which according to Levinas can only be embodied. You can't just look and be like, oh, I see an other, and I analyze that they're sitting on the sidewalk and they look a bit sad. And right, the response, first of all, the helectic moment has hit you and you're in a sort of pain somewhat, right? The response then will come from your body, right? You respond with your body, with something from your body, right? That's why I said to look at him, right? Or to smile, or to talk, or to give something, or to touch, right? These are all possible responses you can give, and that in a way you must give if you want to have that encounter, right? If you want to move through the world as a human being, right? And not just as what Levinas calls the solipsistic ego, right? Let me write this down. So let's define this. Solipsistic ego, which is in fact a closed ego, right? Closed on itself, right? For Levinas, this is a very clear distinction. If you're closed on yourself, you're not yet a human being. You're kind of like an object, right? So to move through the world as a human being is to remain sensitive, is to remain open. And in a way, Levinas is inviting us, especially in a city like this, where we become more and more insensitive and where we enclose ourselves more and more because it's so unbearable. I don't know if you've been in the subway last few years, but the worst place to be. And so we have headphones, we have, I started to wear masks and headphones and a hat in the subway. I was like, I'm not dealing with this, right? So we try more and more to isolate ourselves and impermeabilize ourselves. And Levinas is saying this is dangerous because once you lose your openness, your sensitivity, you lose your humanity. For Levinas, what makes us human is not our intellect, it's our senses. Very different from Aristotle, right? Who said man is a rational animal. Levinas would say, no, what makes us truly human is our ability to have compassion, to sense what is happening around us, the need around us, and to respond to it. That's what it means to move through life like a human being. And the moment we start to close up upon ourselves and to try to not see or to deviate, right? What we just saw, we push it somewhere else, right? We are losing. It's not even about the other anymore. We are losing our own humanity. Clear so far? Objections, questions? Okay, so let's look at the quote for that. So go to page 33, 1, 2, 3, fourth paragraph. I'm going to read the whole paragraph. To be me, ego. Who is there? Put your hand. Okay. So to be me or ego, so to be a self, right? He's redefining now the self, thenceforth signifies being unable to escape from responsibility. That's what it means to be human, when you accept the responsibility. What makes us inhuman is to hear the call and to walk away, right? To be truly human is to hear the call and respond in some way possible, right? As if, he says, the whole edifice of creation stood on my shoulders. You can sense the weight, right? But the responsibility that empties the ego of its imperialism and egoism, right? So this responsibility in a way empties us, but it is a good emptying, right? We are not imperialistic anymore. We shift to a different version of ourselves. Be it the egoism of salvation, does not transform it into a moment of the universal order. And here's the line you get. It confirms the uniqueness of the ego. It is at that moment when you respond that you become fully individuated as a unique self. Before that, you were just the masses, right? So the moment of individuation as a unique particular self, we'll talk about this. The moment of you become something very specific, something very unique, occurs at the moment where you respond to the call, or we'll see with Levinas, another expression, the election that the other places upon us, right? So that's what it means for Levinas to be human, to be capable of responding, to not ignoring, to not becoming calloused and closed off, right? So what's going on? Kim, you had a question for a while now. Go ahead, Kim.
Just a quick question. So I know that you said that, you know, we have the ability to respond and we could, for example, give the homeless person a smile or a conversation. Like, is that really going to help them though? Like, just to give them a more extreme example, like, let's say we were in Nazi Germany, a Jew comes to my door, a runaway Jew, they're trying to hide, and we give them a smile. Is that really going to help them? Like, how is that a proper response?
Yeah, so ultimately, right, Levinas says we are infinitely responsible. There is always more responsibility, right? There's the smile, and then there's the piece of bread, and then there's your whole house, right? The idea, Levinas says, is that even though we can't help everyone, we should realize that we could, right? So in other words, we should never say, I am not responsible because I don't have the resources. We are always responsible. You could actually, theoretically, get the resources together. We could. Every single person in this classroom, if they really put their mind to it, could feed every single person in the world. I'm sure of it, right? But we're busy. We're busy people, right? So what Levinas is saying is that we should never forget, we should never refuse this truth that we are infinitely responsible. We could help them. You could help that homeless person or that Jew that comes to your door, right? But as Kong is saying here in the chat, right, it's better than nothing. It's a beginning, right? What Levinas is, or what I'm trying to communicate from Levinas is that at least respond in some way, right? So you can keep your humanity flowing, right? Because to do nothing at all is really closing completely, and then there's no salvation. So if you at least open up for a smile, you're at least keeping yourself open. And this for Levinas is good, because you're at least, you remain aware, you remain sensitive, right? Kim, does that answer your question a little bit?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, so it's difficult to accept, right, some of the things he's saying, because it's so overwhelming. We're like, what do you mean? Right? So that's the difficulty with Levinas, not only the language, but what he's actually saying. Coco, go ahead.
Twofold. First off, I maybe just me, but I don't think a smile is very good. I when I don't have money, I have any mental strength left, because sometimes I don't, and I do ignore, obviously, like everyone else, because it's a lot. It's a lot. I give it up. That's the best I can do. No, second. I think you're you're overestimating us on that one, because I literally one time made an entire plan to solve the entire homelessness crisis and education system at the same time. Don't ask how I pulled that off. I was for spans of hours and hours and gave myself the ultimate migraine. I'm like, wow, that's great. But who the hell would actually listen?
You don't know. You have to start.
You know what I'm saying? It's like, I don't actually have the power to make people listen to something that came not out of my ass, but it was thoughtful. It was the best I could think of at the moment. But I'm like, oh wow, all that thought was for nothing.
But Coco, you don't know. You haven't tried it. I would invite you to begin trying it and see how many people listen.
I tried.
Very good. Okay, any other questions before we end on Levinas? All right. So the rest of the readings, right, we'll be looking at this idea will come back. The same idea will come back, but he's going to elaborate. There will be more. He will develop it, right? But at least now you have this is the groundwork. If you understood what we talked about today, you will have a much easier time with the text later on. Okay. All right. So good luck with your next reading. I'm going to stop